This is lesson 30 for 7th grade, and today we're talking more about fractions. And yes, we've talked about fractions already this year quite a bit. We've done some adding and subtracting, some multiplying and dividing. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about the adding and subtracting portion, and also we're going to talk about some ordering of fractions, basically least to greatest type things. Taking two fractions and being able to tell which ones are larger, or which one's larger than the other one, or which one's smaller than the other one, that type of thing. Or if they're equal, that type of thing. So today's a little different in the sense that we have to find a common denominator. In the previous chapter that we learned about adding and subtracting fractions, all of our examples already had a common denominator. So the denominators were all the same, and that's what we need to have when we add or subtract fractions. So basically the only difference today is that we're not going to have that situation. We're going to have two fractions, or three, or even more than that, all being added together, and we're going to have to get a common denominator because they're all going to be different. So the things that we're going to learn today, first of all, the biggest thing that we're going to learn today is how to find a common denominator between two or more fractions. And then we're going to learn how to order those fractions from least to greatest. We can do that by finding common denominators between whichever fractions we're talking about. So as long as we can get a common denominator, ordering should not be a problem. And lastly, we're going to learn how to add and subtract these fractions that have different denominators. So once we find a common denominator, we're going to use our prior knowledge of adding and subtracting fractions to help us finish off the problems. So basically this is the big idea today. Once we can do this, we should be able to add and subtract just like we did before. So it shouldn't be too big of a deal. We're just adding one more step to it, and we'll see how that's done in a second. And I'm also going to take this time to say that we should remember that we only need common denominators when we add or subtract. We do not need common denominators when we multiply or divide fractions. So only when we add or subtract do we need common denominators. And if you forget that in class, I have some posters around the room that deal with fractions, and you can always use those at your disposal. So let's look at what we're talking about today. Not too long ago we were talking about the LCM. That would be the least common multiple. We can actually relate that to finding common denominators. So if we look at these two, it says write these fractions with common denominators and then compare the fractions. So they want us to say which one of these is bigger. We're going to use our little alligator teeth to do that. So it's either going to be greater than, less than, or equal to. So in order to do this, we can find a common denominator. And what we're going to want to look at is 6 and 9 here. Alright, so we want to find a common multiple that they have and get them to that multiple. So if we happen to find the least common multiple, we will not have to reduce at all, but not a big deal. We can find any common multiple and we should still be able to get the answer. So let's take a look at this. If I do this the long way, and I write out the multiples of 6, 12, 18, 24, 30, 36, and those keep going. If I list out the multiples of 9, 18, 27, 36, 45, and so on. Alright, we can see that they have common multiples. We've got 36 and 36. We could use that for our common denominator. Looks like they have 18 and 18 in common. Now 18 would be the least common multiple that they have in common, so let's go with that. So what we want to do is multiply 6 by something so that we get 18. Well, 6 times 3 gives us 18, so what I'm going to do is multiply 5 over 6. Now you have to multiply your 5 and your 6 by the same thing. 3 over 3. Now the reason I'm multiplying by 3 over 3 is because 3 over 3 is actually 1. And remember, when we multiply anything by 1, it doesn't change it. It would be like 6 times 1 is always going to be 6. Or 7 times 1 is always going to be 6. 3 over 3 is 1 in disguise. So 5 over 6 times 1 won't change our fraction, we'll just get a different looking fraction. Alright, now we're going to do the same thing with 7 over 9, except for we only have to multiply by 2 to get 9 to 18. So we'll multiply this by 2 over 2. Okay? Now in the future you're not going to have to list out all these multiples, I'm just showing you how this is going to work. So if we go ahead and do this, and I'll drop it down here, we get 3 times 5 is 15. 3 times 6, we should get 18. And 2 times 7 is 14. 9 times 2 is 18. So now that we have common denominators, it's much easier to see which one of these fractions is going to be bigger. Well, 15 out of 18 is just a little bit bigger than 14 out of 18. They are very close in value, but one of them is definitely bigger. So 15 out of 18 would be bigger. So we're going to open the mouth this way. The alligator wants to eat the bigger amount. So 5/6 would be the bigger number there, or the bigger fraction. And that's where common denominators is going to help us out. Let's see. They also had 36 in common, and I'll just show you this real quick. Well, no, we're good here. This will be okay. If you would have used 36 for a common denominator, you still would have got the same answer. Like I said before, you still would have found out that this was the bigger fraction by just a little bit. Okay. Next one here. We're also going to use these common denominators to order fractions. Now it wants us to use least to greatest here, and it even tells us we can use common denominators to help us order them. Maybe we're not sure what these are, you know, off the top of our head, which one's going to be the smallest, which one won't be. There are many ways to do this. You could turn these all into decimals if you want to. If you turn them into decimals, you can order them that way. This section will tell us to use common denominators, so we're going to go ahead and do that. So I look at 3, 6, and 12. These all have a multiple of 12. 12 times 1 is 12, 6 times 2 is 12, 3 times 4 is 12. So I'm going to use 12 as my common denominator, and that means we don't have to change 7 over 12 because it already has a denominator of 12. So we're going to change 2 over 3 and 5 over 6. So 2 over 3, we have to multiply that by 4 over 4 in order to get 12 on the bottom. So we want 12 over here. So 3 times 4 is 12, 2 times 4 is 8. Once again, multiplying by 1 in disguise. 5 over 6. We multiply 6 times 2 to get 12. And that would be up here. 5 times 2 is 10. So now we can see 2/3 is also the same thing as 8 over 12. This is the same as 10 over 12. Oops, sorry. Bad 10 there, bad 0. Alright. So now instead of 2/3, 5, 6, 7 twelfths, we have 8 twelfths, 10 twelfths, 7 twelfths. 7 out of 12 would be the least, so I'm gonna call that 1. 8 out of 12 would be your next up, and 10 out of 12 would be your other one. So if we were to order these, it would be 7 twelfths, 2/3, and 5 6. And that would be our order from least to greatest. Now once again, I said you don't need to use common denominators to do this. We could have turned these into decimals if we wanted to. And if you have a calculator, that's very quick. It's very handy. You would just type in 2 divided by 3 and you'd get a decimal. 5 divided by 6, you'd get a decimal. 7 divided by 12, you'd get a decimal. And you can order them that way too, if you want. Alright, I'm going to check my time quickly. We're getting up there. We might need to turn this into a 2-part lesson today. Like I said earlier, for adding and subtracting fractions, we need common denominators. So let's take a look at this one. 3 over 4 plus 3 over 8, or 3/4 plus 3/8. Now I want to find a multiple that both of these share. I know that 4 goes into 8, and it saves me from having to convert this one into a denominator of 8, because it already has a denominator of 8. So I'm going to change 3/4 into a fraction that has a denominator of 8, so that we can add these. And remember, we only add our numerators once we do that. So 3 over 4 will be multiplied by what, so that we get an 8 in our denominator? Well, 4 times 2 will give us 8, so this has to be 2 over 2, and 3 times 2 is 6. So now, we actually have 6 over 8 plus 3 over 8. And like I said earlier, we only add our numerators, we keep that common denominator. So 8 is going to stay there. 6 plus 3 is 9. And we get an improper fraction. 9 over 8, that's one way you could leave that if you want to leave it improper. If they ask you to simplify, we're going to look for, this is also 1 and 1/8, because we have 1/8 left over with the 9 on top. So 9/8 or 1 and 1/8 right there. And we talked about converting back and forth between those in an earlier lesson. The same goes for subtraction. We will need a common denominator for that, except for instead of adding our numerators, we will subtract them. So we're going to turn 5/6 minus 3/4 into something we can work with. Let me check my time quick again. Alright, we'll go through this one and then I might have to stop and then do a part 2. So 5/6 and 3/4. Well, what does 6 and 4 share? What common multiples do they go into? I'm thinking off the top of my head that 12 would probably be the smallest one, or the least common multiple. They do both share 24 as well. They both go into 24. So let's use 12. It'll save us reducing at the end. So when we use the least common multiple, we don't have to reduce at the end. Kind of like over here. The least common multiple is 8. We got 9 over 8. Can't reduce that. We could change it into a mixed number, but we didn't have to reduce anything. If we used 24 as the common multiple here, we would have to reduce in the end. So if you can find that least common multiple, it's a good idea because it saves you from having to reduce later on. But no worries if you don't. The big idea here is just to be able to add the fractions together or subtract them. So let's use 12. 5/6. We have to multiply that times what to get a denominator of 12. 6 times 2 will give us 12. So 2 over 2. And this is 10 over 12. 3/4. So 4 times what gives us 12? Well, 4 times 3 gives us 12. So that's a 3 over 3. 3 times 3 is 9. So really what we have here is 10 over 12 minus 9 over 12. And we keep our common denominator at 12, and then we do 10 minus 9, which is 1. So we get 1/12 there. So there you go, we didn't have to reduce anything. Okay, I'm going to turn this into a part 2, so pay attention and look for part 2. And we'll go from there.